In this episode of the Encounter Report, 3 Blastia Bombardiers form their own guild in Tales of Vesperia. There's Axelrod, your humble narrator, who did a second plus playthrough on the PlayStation 4, Albels, who did a blind playthrough on the Nintendo Switch, and Daolite, who I think did a not blind playthrough on the PlayStation 4. Everyone played on normal difficulty, and with all that out of the way, it's time to vote on who's going to be the guild leader. First up are battle types, and we can immediately congratulate Daolite for his pain and prestige in entering the 1000 Encounter Club. We can also see the heavy focus on random encounters, which all took 16% or more of the stream percent. This is largely because boss encounters in Tales of games typically don't take long periods of time to defeat, so that time shifts over to other fights. We can also see that despite high amounts of random encounters, nobody managed to die in any of those encounters. Tales of Vesperia does a pretty good job of only letting you go where you're supposed to, so there's very little worry on where you'll be fighting something that you aren't ready for. Bosses and story encounters definitely take up the bulk of total death percent here, of which we will take a look at those story encounters later. The ones in question could be labeled as boss due to how tough they were. Battle locations are up next, and we can see what most of the distribution is in dungeon encounters. Each dungeon in Tales of Vesperia possesses a unique knack for enemy placement that definitely causes a lot of concerns. Yes, I'm talking about you, flying enemies. We will also take a brief look at these encounters being distributed by area. Alikia and Tolbikia are where most of the events and battles take place, so it makes sense that each of us would have the highest encounters in those locations. Of all of these, your Zoria is optional and Wekia only has one dungeon to it. Following that up are combat types, and we can see that deaths and running away weren't too impactful here. Most deaths were incurred on Gattuso and the solo Estelle fights. Although Daolite had a different spread since he didn't die on Gattuso at all, which is super impressive. Subtypes are going to pass us by here. Everyone engaged in some amount of grinding, and surprisingly, our advantage numbers aren't very high. Back attacks, on the other hand, are pretty elevated thanks to flying enemies, and linked encounters were effectively all by accident, but a few weren't. For notable locations, we check out Amid Hill. This dungeon has what was likely the first and only difficulty spike of the game, that being the Gattuso fight. This fight proved to be a very big struggle for Albels and myself, where I had 3 deaths and Albels 4. For everyone, this dungeon did a pretty good job of deleting our resources, and since the save point doesn't fully heal, none of us were at full strength for the fight. Even with that though, Daolite one-shot the fight, reloaded because people were dead, and then proceeded to one-shot the fight again with everyone alive. Crazy. Zaphia's Castle was also a challenging location, particularly the moment where we go rescue Estelle. This dungeon introduced quite a bit of backtracking, and while also not being very threatening, it built up a false sense of security. This is primarily because we all wanted to get our healer back, and instead, that healer was killing us. The Yuri vs Estelle fight claimed 3 deaths for myself, 6 deaths for Albels, and 4 deaths for Daolite. For myself and Daolite, we were both pretty proficient in playing Yuri, but Estelle had a lot of fast-hitting attacks, little hit stun, and some nasty spells. For Albels, he spent the majority of his time playing Rita, citing that he doesn't enjoy playing melee characters. This meant he was relearning all the arts and playstyles associated, which was definitely a deadly experience. Next up is the boss encounter time graph. On the left, we have the time, and on the bottom, each boss in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle, and within those rectangles, the length of time it took each person to defeat the boss on their kill attempt. Here, we can see that we were all in a pretty similar spot for these first set of bosses. Daolite had a very significant Zagi 2 kill, while my Giga Larva was pretty cursed. For the next set of bosses, this is where Daolite separates himself from the group. Nearly every boss kill of his has the lowest time, which is probably a testament to his strategy. My longest time was Terapus, where I played as Estelle, while Albels' times start to increase thanks to his strategy, where he opted to play a character who wasn't Yuri. This was a boon in some fights and a pretty big detriment of others. For the last set of bosses, we can see some of that. Albels acquires the shortest kill for Gusios, but Alexei, Zagi 5, and the Duke fights were among the struggles he encountered. Daolite maintains the shortest times, while I'm not too far behind him. We've also got the level progression graph for each person. On the left, we have the levels, and on the bottom, many of the bosses in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle in the graph, and within those rectangles, we have Yuri's levels for each participant when that boss was defeated. Lastly, the red shows the level of the boss. Here we can see a pretty steady ramp up for levels, and there's very little fluctuation for us. The Gusios fight is the start of the slight shift where Daylight breaks from the pack on Zagi 5. This is also a scenario where the boss levels are higher than the character levels, with the exception of Zagi 5 and on. In many cases, bosses have 5 or more levels than us for a decent amount of time. You might need to go full screen and get a microscope because party composition is next, and I'm showing every character at once. Characters who made up the final party have a faint gray highlight to them, and it's pretty notable that each of us had Rita in the party. Historically, mages have a pretty mixed amount of usefulness, but Rita's spells definitely felt impactful. In fact, they were so impactful that Albelz dropped Yuri entirely and played Rita for the vast majority of the game. Albelz played Yuri a total of 50 times, while playing Rita 739 times. Daylight and myself had some experimentation, but primarily played Yuri for basically the entire time. Albelz was also the only person to use Patty extensively, and his strategy was pretty crazy. Build up over limit and then just watch her use Risky Cast and later Gamble Cast over and over again. She was an absolute monster in fights and cleaned house. We've also got chapter data for encounters. Tales of Vesperia doesn't section off the game by chapters, but these portions felt pretty good. Chapter 2 starts after Barbos is killed, and Chapter 3 starts after Mount Temza is completed, which is when we get access to flying. Finally, Chapter 4 starts after Alexei is defeated. There's some variety in the range of these numbers, but with the exception of Chapter 4 for Daylight, we have some similar areas here. Albelz and Daylight have very close numbers for Chapter 1 and 3, while all of us have similar numbers for Chapter 2. Our total death percent is also pretty varied, but Chapter 3 is consistently the most deadly. The number of enemies per encounter follows that up briefly to show a different split of encounters. 3 and 4 enemy encounters were the most common types, even going as far as to have very similar times for Daylight. For 6 through 10 enemies, these were mostly tied to link encounters, so their numbers are on the low side. I managed to get up to 10 enemies in a single fight, which is quite a bit for an action RPG like this. And to close everything out, here are the final combined stats. Since both Albelz and myself didn't do much of the optional content available in Chapter 4, we managed to stay out of the 1000 Encounters Club. That being said, 25 to 30% encounter percent seems pretty par for the course in the grand scheme of things, but quite high for a Tales of game so far. But that's the Tales of Vesperia Encounter Report. I hope you visit everyone's channels and social media to praise them for all this wonderful data. With another report done, we can go back to wondering what in the world Jaeger was doing and just how he got that accent. Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you on the next video.